Good evening. I'm proud to welcome everyone on behalf of the town of Los Lunas, the Los Lunas Museum of Heritage and Arts, and this unique exhibit of both traditional and contemporary Hispanic art. Especially pleased to welcome our four artists on the panel, Tim Lucero, Roxanne Shaw Galindo, Nicolás Otero, and Gabriel Vigil, who will be discussing their art. The Rio Abajo has a rich tradition of these traditional Hispanic arts and contemporary Hispanic art, dating back to the famous Santero, who's known variously as Moyeno or Antonio Salazar, however you wish to remember him, back in the 18th century. And so this tradition has gone on for a long time here in the Rio Abajo, and we're so pleased that we can discuss this again with our artists this evening. So I'm going to ask them I'll ask some questions and let them discuss either directly or amongst themselves, and we'll go from there. So the first question I'll just direct to Nicolás. He's the curator of the exhibit, so we'll let him start. And that was, how did you get into the field of Hispanic folk art, both traditional and contemporary?
I was apprenticed by Rhonda Crispin in high school. She was there for a grant program that was sponsored through the Spanish Colonial Art Society. And so I did basically a 2-year apprenticeship with her in the summers, and then I also was able to show at Spanish Market. And that's how I got started initially, yeah.
How about you, Roxanne? How did you get started in this area?
I got started I learned how to paint from my mom. She's also an artist in the show. She's been painting retablo since 1991, and she taught me how to paint. I started in 1994. So I learned a lot of the traditional methods from my mom and kind of just grew from there.
I got started when I was about 16, 17 years old. I would go to the old chapels with my grandparents, my mom, like the Santuario, and I would love to draw cartoon characters. And to me, the old saints look like cartoon characters. And I said, one day I'm going to try to do that. And before I know it,
Do you still draw cartoon characters?
I don't have time anymore.
My journey started when I was maybe 8 or 9. I did a project in 4th grade on New Mexico history, and one of the tasks was to create New Mexico folk art, which I was already familiar with the content. So I was pretty excited about that, and my teacher then showed a friend of the family, Master Santero Filimon Aguilar, showed him my project, and he took me under his wing, and I learned all the traditional methods from him, and I continued he introduced me to Spanish Market, the youth market, and I've been painting ever since.
So you folks generally represent the younger generation, if you will, of what has been a long tradition of Hispanic folk art. How have you chosen to work either in the traditional style or the more contemporary style?
Well, me personally, I do both. I love doing the traditional wood carving and butos, retablos off the screens. But I also work in large-scale canvases that are liquid acrylic, and so I do both. I love doing both.
Roxanne?
I think I've mostly just stayed traditional. I've done a couple contemporary pieces, but I just mostly just stayed traditional. It's kind of just more like my style. I love the contemporary ones, especially Nick's and Gabe's, and even with others, but I've just mostly stayed traditional.
Yeah. I started off with very traditional. Mr. Aguilar would harvest his own pigments and That's where I started. I've also done acrylic, and right now I'm working with watercolor, and it's a combination of traditional medium and contemporary, I guess, because I do make a lot of the homemade medium as well as watercolor.
How about the choice of subjects from contemporary or traditional point of view?
For me, it's a fine line. I try to balance. Like I said, I started off very traditional, and then my background is I went to art school for a while, so I learned a lot of the academic techniques, and I try to apply them to some of my works now.
Nick,
So
what about
it's
your
a
choices?
combination, really.
It depends. I mean, sometimes you're prompted by like galleries, for example. A good example is there was a show in Scottsdale. It was called The Holy Dozen. And so we had the opportunity to basically come up with images that tied to that theme. So there was one artist that did a dozen eggs in an egg carton, and it had the 12 disciples. I did, for that show specifically, I had painted a San Raphael, who's the patron saint of messengers, but I painted him kind of like in a TV set as a news anchor. So there's opportunities to do that. So
I would agree. I remember doing that show with Nick as well, and I kind of did the same kind of thing, taking saints, trying to make him a little bit more modern, more contemporary. I did a Gabriel?
Yeah.
I did Gabriel, but I put him as, he is a messenger. I painted him as a someone who delivers mail with the post box.
Mailman.
Yeah, mailman.
Oh.
And it's probably one of the favorite ones I've had. And then with the Holy Family, I just dressed him modern.
Yeah.
Well, I love doing Day of the Dead pieces, the Day of la Muerte pieces, and that's probably the most contemporary subject matter I do. But as far as traditional technique, I usually use traditional pigments, wood carving, but I also paint with the natural or the from on the canvases I paint with not natural pigments, but with acrylic paint, which is not traditional at all.
Many of the topics, even when you're describing your contemporary ones, the 12 apostles as eggs in a carton or the Holy Family dressed contemporary, there's always it seems to me, always an element of spirituality. How has spirituality, not necessarily organized religion, but spirituality influenced your work? Nick?
for me, it's I don't know. It's kind of hard because I think the spiritual side usually comes out like on a Saturday morning when I'm getting up and my day's starting versus coming home after a long day of teaching and painting. Sometimes it's a very spiritual process. I guess I don't know how to.
I guess I would ask sort of the contrary. You talked a little bit almost about being commissioned to do some work. So if you're commissioned in some specific area, that's one thing. But so how do you distinguish between, and I don't want to sound pejorative, but the commercial idea, the Spanish market and the Spanish youth market, and the sort of general spiritual part of being a santero or santera?
I would say, like for me, every piece or every saint I'm going to get ready to paint, I always ask that saint to bring forth their spirit towards me so I can display them through my eyes and make them as beautiful as they want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I did the piece with Pat, it was La Conquistadora. It was the first one I've ever done. And I specifically decided to make it as beautiful as I possibly can through her eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I try to present the saint through their eyes, through my eyes.
Tim?
For me, I feel like when I'm painting the santos, it's a form of meditation for me in a way, and it has helped my faith and my spirituality in a lot of ways. And I feel like I'm a messenger or a storyteller that I have to do justice. I have to really tell this saint's story in the best visual way I can.
Okay?
Spirituality, I mean, each piece I do, I say a prayer to that saint. Each piece I create, I dedicate it to a person who has peace or who has either passed in my life or someone I see on the news. And I ask them for their soul to give me the strength and also the saint to give me the strength. When I started doing retablos, I never imagined I'd been making money off it. It was always a spirituality thing. I mean, it's a blessing. I could take care of my family for it, but it's not the reason I do it.
I see.
So I know that when we had the last discussion, there was a lot of discussion about the importance of Spanish market. But I found two kinds of points of view. One was it's important because you can sell your work. The other was it's important because you get feedback from your fellow artists. Does that ring true with you as well?
I would say so.
Yeah.
I would say so. I really, from being a youth artist to an adult artist, the transition of that, it's kind of been a huge transition.
Mhm.
But I remember even when I first started doing it, it was the excitement of making that money for the summer. And then it becomes that excitement of providing for your family.
Mm-hmm. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. I mean, the things are so beautiful and obviously so appreciated. I mean, look at the attendance at the museum and the support that it's gotten. Obviously, it means that there's a deep-seated relationship between the people who view your art and the art itself. One of the things that people have talked about is this is a way of connecting with your ancestors. And you said, many of you said you started it when you were quite young. Your mother was involved. Is that something that involves you as well, the others of you? Was there an ancestral connection, either direct, that is, a family member, or to someone like Antonio Salazar or Moyeno or the others, that the Bultos and Tomé or something like that really was a connection for you?
For me, the spirituality has always been there. As far as picking it up as a traditional art form from a family member, I had to learn through an apprenticeship, but thank God I did, because had I not, I don't know what my identity would be now, you know. But like your mom taught you, right? So she was lucky in that way too.
Who taught your mom?
My mom taught herself. My grandfather was a history teacher. So even I've lived in Colorado my whole life, but I've came to New Mexico almost every year since I was born. And it was just being for all the history in New Mexico. He really just told my mom, like, you should really try this. Like, you should just try it and see where it takes you, see where it goes. And she started off just doing a piece, taking it to the Denver Art Museum and asking if she could commission them in their shop. And it just went from there. And I think that inspires me, that she was like so determined to just, wow, let's just take it from there to there.
Tim or Gabe, do you have any sort of familial or relationship connection to the long-standing traditions in the Rio Bajo?
Definitely. I mean, Santuario de Chimayo is like second home. My twin brother, that's where our hearts live. And seeing Aragon's pieces in there completely influenced who I am today. I mean, my style, my retablos, you look at his, I mean, I feel like he's major part of my life. And I thank God every day for what he left us, all of us, to basically copy and to inspire us to become, like Nick said, have our identity as Santeros and Santeras. And it's important. I hope all of us, our kids, do the same thing. Exactly what he did for us.
Tim?
Well, I grew up in small town of Bernalillo, and I mean, it's just the spirituality, the historic aspect of it all. It's pretty much ingrained in you as a kid. So all those aspects are already there, and it was just a matter of finding my path, and it happened to be art. that, the cultural aspect actually, came out in that art form.
Nick?
I got on a wavelength there. I was just thinking about how, like, because we're all very close friends, like the four of us, and we recently started an art group called Sagrada, which is basically we look out for each other. We recognize the importance of our traditions. But I think I was talking to Roxanne a while back, and I was telling her, like, we all of a sudden we're the new generation, right? We're the next generation, so the responsibility is kind of fallen on us to pass that on, And I think one of the challenges of that is that the methodologies. I don't think there's that many young people that are willing to take the time, right, guys, to really focus on that. And so, I don't know. It's a big responsibility.
Well, it seems to me that it's not just taking the time, but there's a risk. I mean, if you're an artist and some of you have some dependency, as you mentioned, this is a livelihood in addition to an avocation. Is there a risk that you take and that you have to sort of step off the platform and into a dark area and you don't know what you're going to find? Did you go through that feeling, or?
I never really thought it's been a risk.
No.
I mean, I think every piece has a home for the person that's going to buy it. And yeah, you can make a piece, and I've had a piece one time. I had it, almost 8 years, and I kept bringing it to Spanish market, being faithful that someone would finally bring it home. And then I stopped bringing it for like 2 years, and then I finally brought it one more time, and this person was like, I've come here before. I don't think I've ever seen this piece. And I'm like, I brought it for like 10 years. They're like, I want it. I'm going to take it. I'm like, oh my God. But even when it left, I started crying because I had it so long.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
So how much carving do you do for yourselves? In other words, something that you say, I'd like to put this on my mantle, or I want this sort of thing on my mantle, versus hey, I think this might be something that other people would like.
You looking at me?
Yeah.
I'm a married man. I got a wife. She wants me to pay bills.
How inconsiderate.
I mean, I'm very blessed. She lets me do my art for a living, but we trade a lot. I mean, that's the beauty of our art, is you get to trade.
Mhm.
You get to collect each other's art. But no, not too much goes to me.
That's right. That's right. How about you, Tim?
We have some of my very first pieces that were done on scrap pieces of wood with some enamel paint in the garage, and we saved those, and
Kind of like the things your mom puts on the refrigerator.
yeah, exactly. And my wife has a piece, not a recent piece, but she kept one of the pieces, and that's the only one we have at home.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Nick?
I wish I could keep something for myself, but it's hard. Because there's always something to do for someone,
So how do you get commissions? Is it sort of just word of mouth? I mean, people know you and they say, hey, Roxanne, would you please carve me a San Miguel or whatever? Or do you solicit?
It just varies. I mean, some of my collectors who collect for me will just say, hey, I would really like you to paint this, or I would like you to paint this for a baptism, or, it just goes from, I would say, word of mouth.
Are there topics you stay away from?
Me?
No. You'll paint. Is there something where you'll paint or carve almost anything? I mean, I'm not almost anything, but yes.
So there hasn't been anything I've really had to decline. Everything's pretty reasonable in my mind. I've never really.
The reason I ask is because if you go to the museum, it's a tremendously varied exhibition. I mean, there's everything from large Guadalupes to very fine jewelry to small weavings to bultos, to retablos and other things. And so it seems like there's a huge variety out there. And I wonder how people decide that they want to get something like this or that. How do your customers decide? So how do you think your customers decide? How do you get customers? Do they contact you or do you contact them?
Personally, I've been blessed through Spanish market, through galleries, and then one commission usually leads to another. As long as you do one commission right, usually the saints will take care of you.
Saints take care of you.
And that's the way I look at it.
Well, good. How long have you been carving now?
This will be my 24th year in Spanish market, or 25th year
Wow.
doing something.
Wow. How about you,
In
Tim?
my 20s.
Yeah, I think you're the young member of this panel. How many years have you been doing this?
Well, I think I did 5 years of youth market, and then when I started my graphic design career, I actually took a good 10 years off. So I didn't do much for close to 10 years, and then when I started back up again, I've been at it for about 7 years now. So
Are you still doing graphic design as well?
yes, that's what I do full time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
But,
it varies from full-time work to people who are full-time
Yeah.
carvers, you know?
I tell everyone that time off, it was just, I missed it so much, and I feel like it was calling me back. I just couldn't leave it. I had to start again, and I'm glad I did.
So Roxanne, you are a woman in what has been predominantly a man's world for centuries. Have you been challenged by that? Have there been issues that you've had to overcome?
I haven't been challenged. I haven't had any issues. I think it's great that having these male friends, that we all kind of work together and support each other, just like Nick said. So I don't think, and I don't look at it any different, and I don't think it should be gender-based.
Well, I agree with you, but it has been. You'll have to agree.
Yes,
Yes.
it has. I think when Spanish market first started, how it was all males, and now how there's gradually being more females. Even the student that Nick has taught, and all the students he's taught, I'm hoping there'll be more females. But it comes into like creating and doing the traditional methods. Are you willing to become a carver? Are you willing to make all the material from scratch? It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Well, it's a job. It can be a job as well as a calling.
Yeah, it's both.
Yeah. Do you folks? How do you? There's going to be another generation. Even though you guys are young carvers or young santeros, there's going to be a new generation. How do you plan, or are you already transferring your skill and the spirituality you bring into your art to the next generation?
Personally, my daughter's starting to carve, or not carve, but paint, and I just tell her, just follow your heart. Don't do it because you want to make a bunch of money or because you want ribbons. If you're doing it for that reason, you're doing it for the wrong reason. And she creates some of the coolest things I couldn't even imagine.
Oh, I've noticed that there are some very young artists that are exhibiting over at the museum.
Yeah, there's some amazing young kids. And I just hope they do it for the right reason.
Do you take on students yourself?
Oh, yeah, personally, yeah.
So you have students who come and carve under your supervision?
Yeah, paint. I do
Or painting
a
or
lot
what?
of workshops for the Spanish Culinary Arts Society
Okay.
and throughout the elementaries and stuff.
How about the rest of you? I know, Nick, you're an educator by profession. How do you transfer your passion for this and your techniques and so forth to the next generation?
Well, I have a 7-year-old son, so right now he's kind of like in a Picasso stage where it's not really recognizable what he's doing. But I try to influence him by basically just modeling for him. But, teaching workshops and things like that, like these guys do, that's important to me, to be able to pass it.
sharp knives?
He's a boy. He wants a pocket knife so bad. Yeah,
Sure does.
but it's no, not yet.
How about you, Roxanne? Do you take on students? And
No, I really haven't taken on much students. I do have 2 children. I have an 8-year-old and a 13-year-old. I don't push them to want to paint unless they want to paint. And they're pretty decided of what they decide for their faith and what interests them. I think it's the same thing with my mom. I have a sister, and she never really was interested in painting, but my mom never pushed her to do it. So I'm going to kind of do the same thing. I'm not going to push my kids. If they're willing to learn, I think they'll be willing to learn. But I have given them knives, and they do carve with me, especially when I carve, and it is bite. Like nail biting, like scary. But then it's the times when like you have your favorite knife and they drop it on the ground and it chips the top tip of it. It's like, oh, not gonna do that one again.
well, remember that 13-year-old's not far from that, so sharp knives may be the least of your worries. Tim, what about you?
Well, I haven't had the opportunity to mentor anybody, but I have 2 boys, 8 and 5, and they seem to have an interest in the art form. And I think it's important, like Mr. Aguilar taught me basically 3 important aspects of being a santero. There's, the technical aspect, of course, historical and spiritual. And the most important was you have to have the passion to do it. You can't force anybody to do it. You can't make anybody, want to do it. You have to have the passion inside to want to do this art form.
So it sounds like most of you are talking about transferring your art and your passion for it to your own children. How about reaching out beyond your families? I know the exhibit obviously is a big part of that. There have been a lot of young people who've come through the exhibit. Now, whether they're inspired to take it up as an avocation or hobby, or whether they're actually just going to observe and enjoy the art. But it seems to me that if this is going to prevail and continue, it needs to be spread not just with your children but others. How is that to happen, do you think?
Well, I think it's right now. It's more important than ever to be doing outreach. We talk, we're the next generation, but I feel that slowly that I can't use that anymore because we're getting older and our kids are getting older, and I think it's a huge responsibility for us, and I think the 4 of us definitely recognize that the need to continue to put the culture out there, to teach just like we were taught. I mean, I think it's the only way that it's going to survive, really, So we have to go beyond ourselves and our family to do that, for sure.
I would definitely agree with that. Same thing with having kids and then having their friends come over. You could tell which ones that are kind of interested and not interested. So hoping that maybe I can find that lucky one that would be really interested. I could show them. I just haven't had that experience or anybody willing to learn. I hope that we can, yes, definitely spread the knowledge and the education while we're young to teach others.
You're young. So thinking specifically about this exhibit, did you, when Nick or somebody else approached you about exhibiting here, I know it's been a long time in planning and organizing, did you decide to use a favorite piece like your one for 8 years at the Spanish Market, or did you decide to carve a specific one or paint a specific one for this exhibit? How did you decide, and what was sort of behind your decision?
I decided from the beginning, I asked a booth neighbor, Pat, if she would be willing to try something beyond that nobody else has tried, to take a straw applique artist and a retablo artist and put them together.
Ooh.
And at first I was like, didn't think it could happen. And even as I built the piece, it started warping. Then I'm like, this isn't gonna happen. But I think because Pat told me you could do it, we could do it, it can get you done. And that's what we did.
So you made a piece specifically for this. How about you, Gabe? Did you pick a piece you already had that was a favorite, or did you start from scratch and build one for this exhibit?
For this exhibit, I specifically wanted to do a piece with my dad who builds guitars, and he built a acoustic guitar from scratch. He's done the Spanish market. He won grand prize a couple years ago in the contemporary market, and so it was very important that my work plus his work plus my twin brother, who's part of the show, Gilbert, his bronze is in there. That as a family we were all represented.
What a wonderful idea! What piece did you decide to do? Did you have a family decision on what you were going to do, or did you decide and they helped you put it together? Or?
Well, my twin, his Guadalupe was already done. It's an edition. I think there's a few left in the edition. And then me and my dad, as soon as Nick gave us the opportunity to discuss what we were going to do, and he made the guitar and I painted it.
Wonderful.
Now it's in the show.
Great. How about you, Tim?
Well, I brought a piece that a private collector has that I borrowed, and that piece was in the San Isidro show over at the National Hispanic Cultural Center. So I brought that one, and that one kind of reflects a little bit of contemporary concept to it. And the other piece was a larger piece that I decided, and I want to thank Nick. He kind of pushed me out of my comfort zone to create something, a little bit larger than I'm used to. So, yeah, thanks, man.
So you actually put together something original for, and
Yes,
I don't mean
specifically for
dedicated for the show.
Yeah.
Nick, what about you? I mean, in addition to curating this exhibit and helping these guys pick which ones they were gonna do, you actually are exhibiting in the exhibit as well. And how did you choose?
Well, it was pretty much impossible for me to make a new piece. I thought I was going to be able to make a piece, but the focus kind of shifted from me making something to putting my energy into curating the exhibition. But don't think for a second that I didn't think, oh gosh, Tim, Roxanne, Gabe, I have to make something that's going to be at the same level. So there was kind of like this healthy spirit about the pieces that I put in.
So how do you put a face on one of your paintings or something? What inspires you? I mean, you have a vision of what they look like, what you want it to look like. And does that come, you said maybe someone who's passed or someone who's important to you? How do you guys choose how to put a face on these things? Because the faces are so important to the art. You guys don't need to all answer at once either. So Roxanne, how do you decide how to put a face on?
I would say a lot of times when people look at my female saints, they always say that, oh, it looks just like you. So, or you're painting yourself. And
There's nothing wrong with that, I don't think.
nothing isn't wrong with it. And then the males, when I try to paint a male, I'm like, how do I paint a male? And even like, I love doing Adam and Eve's, but even when you do Adam and Eve's, like I'll have like my husband or the child or somebody like stand there so I can get your arms the way I want them to look. And try to get them to look just like people.
Nick, how about you?
I was so concentrated on what you were saying.
Well, Tim, how about you? We'll give Nick a chance to think about it.
Well, I guess I've developed my own style, and it's a goal of mine to really show like a gentle human aspect to their faces, because they were actual human beings that lived. So like I said before, it's my goal to tell their story the best way I can, and making them with gentle, spiritual looking faces. If that's what I need to do to get the story across, then that's what I've done in developing my style.
There's an interesting story. I don't know how many of you have been down to Our Lady of Sorrows in La Jolla, but there's a wonderful Vigil fresco there, and of the Our Lady of Sorrows, and except for the the face of Christ and the face of Mary. All the other faces are people from the village who have passed, and they painted those. It's a beautiful fresco. Have any of, I mean, fresco seems like an art form as well. It's a little harder to display, obviously, but have any of you ever worked in fresco or large mural work of that sort? I know there are artists who work in that. Have you done some of that?
Personally, I keep saying personally. I'm doing a commission for a church in Arizona, and I'm working on my third mural now, and each one is 18 feet by 24
Wow.
feet. And I did the stations for the same church, and those are pretty big. They're like 11 by 8 feet.
Wow.
So I've done quite a few.
11 by 8 feet and 14 stations. Is there any wall space that isn't covered?
I hope so. 'Cause
Wonderful. So do you take the same perspective on doing a mural, a large painting like that you would for some of your carving?
No,
Just have a beer and do it?
yeah. Yeah, there you go.
You want to have one of his? Sounds to me like buying him a beer is a good way to start.
I should just say that.
You'll never live that down. It's permanent on tape now. Any other questions or things? Yes, sir.
Nicholas has done a mural, but when he finished the mural, it's at the Luna Mansion, and we went to go look at it, we were with him, and he says, "These are my Santos while they're partying." So he kind of incorporated the faces and everything of the mural that he normally uses for Santos, but then he had them smoking a pipe and wearing a top hat. And it's kind of like, if you look at it closely, yes, there's the same thing there, but they were partying.
The party exists. No reason saints can't party, I guess. Other comments or questions, something you'd like to have the folks discuss, or something that hasn't been covered? Yes, sir.
How do you as artists deal with the board that warps and the things that don't turn out right and the commitment of time? It seems like it would be scary to start a big, complicated, intensive project and like that. I mean, is my thought about that? Do you have any of that kind of experience?
I mean, I've never learned anything the easy way, so everything I've learned in my life has been the hard way. So, and I mean, it just comes error after error. Eventually, you learn. I think with anything.
And mistakes along the way, things you have
Oh,
to
yeah.
throw away.
A lot of mistakes. I was asking the saints, please forgive me. I said that in front of you.
One wing smaller than the other.
We're all human. We learn from mistakes, and especially in art.
How about those of you who paint? I mean, it's one that you carve a little bit, and well, maybe you can work around that. But when you paint, it's there. You paint over it, or how do you handle that?
The nice thing with watercolor is you can erase it with water. So I've done that a lot. And, gesso recipes, I have notebooks of just trial and error, just over and over. It's nice being a part of the artist family, I call it, because at any time you could just call someone up and ask them for tips, what worked for them, what's the best material to use in this instance, or so we all share a lot of our tips with each other, but it's trial and error for sure.
For those of you who carve, do you mostly use cottonwood? That was the traditional wood, correct? Do you principally carve with cottonwood, or do you use something else?
I usually use gelatin. That's more of the wood most of the Santillos use now.
Is that right?
Sometimes I use cotton root. For my retablos, I use nothing but pine.
Nothing but pine. And the choice is because of the way it works, or when you work it, it's a little more straightforward, or is there some other reason?
The pine is just the flat boards. If you use the right kind of pine, you get less warping, and then also you get the less resin sap.
Okay, so you want a really cured piece of pine,
Yeah.
probably. How about you?
For carving, I prefer aspen.
Ask it.
It's lighter wood, it's easier to carve.
Is that
I have used jelly tongue. Pine, sugar pine's probably the best. So the little, not as too hard to carve with. But I definitely prefer aspen.
Do you use cottonwood at all?
No.
No. Nick, what about you?
I use basswood. I've been
Basswood.
using a lot of basswood lately. It's a nice tight grain. Pine sometimes gets real sappy, but basswood is a great wood for painting a retablo on. It's also one that I think the icon painters also favor using.
And the reason is?
Just because of the tight grain and it's carvable, it's very clean.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as porous as some other woods.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Any- Yes, ma'am.
Not such a question, but just as an older artist of these younger ones, I just commend you all for doing what you do. I'm delighted. The show is just so impressive, and it's just remarkable that this generation is going to carry on the Spanish tradition, and to us that have been there for a while, it's amazing to see that we don't have to worry. We have some people that can carry that on. So
I think that's a really excellent note to close on. I'd like to give our panel a round of applause. And not only thank them for coming this evening, but for the wonderful exhibit that they have participated in here at the Los Lunas Museum of Heritage and Arts. Thank you all for coming.